Yeah, kitty. All right, community, creatives, kind folks, hello. Welcome to RPG with DBJ. Today is Future Friday, and we are finishing our conversation about mountains. Of course, Future Friday, that means we're going to talk about everything from essentially modern day up into the far future, because my particular just desire and love of fiction and that kind of thing, because we tend to talk about fantasy primarily during the week. So today's just our opportunity to talk about anything from modern day all the way to the far future. And with far future, mixing it with mountains, you can't ignore alien colonization and going to these far off places, especially considering the title of the video. The title is Olympus Mons, which is the largest mountain on the surface of Mars. Now, of course, this will apply to any number of planetary surfaces or asteroids, whatever, but I thought I'd pick something that is reasonably realistic, and we can talk about it from there. I want to let you guys know that I've gotten a ton of brilliant responses concerning the mountains and the environment and such, so I'm going to compile them together, because next week, one of our brilliant family members here on the channel has said, well, let's talk about the weather itself. So I think it's best compiled together, especially Joseph Keenan, Scott Poe gave a great example. I think a lot of us in our own communities around the world, we experience it's like little things when it comes to the environment and weather, and when you start mixing them together or even turn the volume up just a little bit more, in what we experience in our regular day, I think would be really excellent. All right. Tesla Ranger says, do pyramids count as alien-made mountains? But I would have to say yes, especially if the aliens have landed those pyramids on the planetary surface. Although, they were hand built. No one knows how they did it. Yeah. Ricker says, hey, first time this week the notification went out before I was already watching the stream. I know that's annoying as heck. A lot of times in the morning, I've been making the videos public about 20 minutes, half hour to 20 minutes before the stream went in, and it still didn't get out there. So I'm going to have to do them, get back into the rhythm of putting them live right after we end the stream that we're already doing. Ricker says, turns out Olympus Mons is actually an alien observatory long since abandoned. Lots of Greek iconography found within when excavated. And of course, our scientific community is obsessed with Greek, the Greek pantheon when it comes to naming our planets and stars and all that kind of stuff. Although I think they've run out of some. One of our planets is named after characters from Shakespeare, but yeah, they've used every single permutation of the Greek and Roman mythology and words and stuff, names and such. So yeah, you can't run out of it, and it would be quite hilarious if it was true or close to Venus was named after the goddess of beauty, and that somehow it's related to that. That'd be kind of cool. But anyway, getting back to mountains, one of the things that we didn't bring up about scaling these tall mountains, and I believe I didn't even look up Olympus Mons. One of the things that we didn't bring up is that there's a lot of people who die not from falling, but die from exposure on mountains, and some of that is even caused by a thing called hypoxia, which is a lack of oxygen, and it's kind of like carbon monoxide poisoning. It's something that sneaks up on people, and they can just literally just pass out or fall asleep and never wake up. They lose their faculties, their memories, their ability to speak, just get confused. They can lose hours of have such memory loss that they'll lose hours of their day and not realize what's going on. And it's like if you were to incorporate this in the tabletop community, it's possible that there we go. Facts. It's possible that, you know, it's not only silent and you can't sense it, but it could be insidious, and you would really have to kind of foreshadow what would happen to them while it's happening, not describing it at all, and maybe saving throw failures or something leads to them having memory losses or oversleeping or something before somebody realizes exactly like, well, we're suffering from hypoxia. We've got to figure out a way to get the heck up out of here. So I've got my page open here for Olympus Mons. Not that we needs quite specifics, but I wanted to find out how tall it was, and it is tallest planetary mountain in the solar system, Olympus Mons. It is, let's see, the peak is 21,281.4 meters, or 69. So 21,000, 21,000 or meters, or 69, almost 70,000 feet above the datum. Wow, that's pretty. Wow. Trying to see if we can get any other weird, strange details in here. There's a lot of scientific information and the naming conventions. There's impact craters on it. It's a shield volcano, resembles the shape of the large volcanoes making up the Hawaiian Islands. Let's see, Mount Everest is about 8.9 miles high, and Olympus Mons is, meters. I'm sorry. Mount Everest is 8.8 thousand meters, and Olympus is almost 21 and a half thousand. That's crazy. So, okay. So, yep, Dead Man Storyteller. Yep. Says the peak is 21.287.4 meters, or 69,800 feet above ground level. And of course, you can't literally fall from the peak to ground level. I mean, unless the interior volcanic area has a straight path downwards. But let's remind ourselves that the peak is so tall, and of course Mars' atmosphere is so thin. I'm pretty sure when you're up at the upper reaches, it's probably either completely airless or functionally airless, depending on how tall the atmosphere is on Mars. I don't know whether it pops through the upper atmosphere, although some science fiction writers have suggested that if we were to terraform Mars, that the thickening of the atmosphere would bring the atmosphere down below the upper peaks of Olympus Mons. But okay, so along with all the things we talked about the rest of the week when it comes to mountains, scaling them, and the dangers of collapsing rock, and we talked about some other weather effects. When you talk about, since we're talking about science fiction, the idea of a mountain, air quote mountain, may exist on anything from asteroids to small moons to other planetary surfaces, and you have all the hazards that are involved in that. Lighter and or heavy gravity, toxic atmospheres, weather systems that do not correspond to earthly weather systems. Mars has storms, although the particulates aren't extremely erosive. The winds on Mars when storms kick up are probably 5 times as powerful. Let me see if I can. Let's look up wind. Let's see what some information is about. There they go. Yep. Mars is famous for its large planet-wide dust storms. Mars has an atmosphere which is much thinner than the atmosphere on Earth, but which still creates winds. Most dust storms cover an area for a few days and carry small particulates of dust at speeds of 33 to 60, 65, 33 to 66 miles an hour. Um, Yeah, sometimes though, rarely dust storms on Mars can be fierce enough to cover the entire planet in a dusty haze for weeks. Which you know, if you're if you're the dungeon master, the game master, man, it's like it's the possibilities of the fact that the possibilities, the fact that that a dust storm lasts. Yeah, gotta get the almond milk. Mm. Life-giving goodness. If only I was sponsored by them. Anyway, it- it, um, as a game master, you want to have, like, me. I'm suggesting, like, oh, include like winds and storms, and we talked about poisonous gases and all that kind of stuff to tell the PCs, like, yeah, I know you're the long range guy, which you're like, I don't know, gyrojet sniper rifle or something, but we're going to have storms for like 3 weeks. I think they'd be kind of little pissed off about that one. You guys are silly. So, along with the idea of what we talked about kind of in our medieval things, those same hazards exist when scaling a large scale, when trying to scale a large object or a structure like something like Olympus Mons would be. Considering how large it is, I would imagine that you would probably have an entire adventure or even a campaign just navigating the highest peaks and the lowest crevices on something like Olympus Mons. I'm sure with it being 69,000 feet, which I mean that's just an unimaginable height. I'm sure your average earthly crevice of a few hundred feet could be thousands of feet deep. It's possible to come across jagged rock that extends for miles, and instead of just a few dozen feet or a few hundred feet or something. And of course, if you're lost or you're in trouble on the surface of that place without GPS, I mean, or some kind of like triangulation system or drones or something, you get in a lot of trouble. And I think even with high technology, any kind of aerodyne systems, hover vehicles, maybe using prop engines, or I don't know, anti-gravity or magnetic fields, or any ion engines or whatnot, you can really play with the idea of the PCs getting in trouble and getting in certain hazards long before you start incorporating like rogue robots or alien species or intergalactic piracy or something, or terrorists taking over the space station that's built into the volcano that's on the top of Olympus Mons. And how important would Olympus Mons be uh, in the overall galactic scale? Would it be the headquarters of the first landing party, or the transferred? Is it the transferred location of the headquarters of the new Mars republic? Was it taken over by refugees that were escaping the gravity well of Earth? Is it the location of the landing point of multiple space elevators that lead up and down off of Mars surface? I mean, there are any number of reasons. It could be a protectorate. Hey Vince, what's going on? It could be a protectorate trying to protect some of the last and largest natural formations on Mars. If tens of millions of people live on the surface of Mars and have uh, completely urbanized or colonized it. I mean, there's any number of things. If you are scientifically minded, an excellent trilogy is the Red Mars, Green Mars, Blue Mars series trilogy, each respectively named one of those books, in which they talk about the idea of there's a Red Mars versus Green Mars ecological group, where some want to some people want to terraform Mars and make it green. Others want to keep it red and keep it the way it is. And during the terraforming process, the lowest levels were starting to become terraformed, but the highest reaches still remained, not necessarily completely red, but from a distance, red, airless or very thin atmospheres and stuff. Yeah, Vince says, without it having any context, mountain spaceships? Yeah, absolutely. Which essentially would be, I don't know, asteroids hollowed out and then throw some engines on the bottom of them. There's even brought up the idea of would alien pyramids count? Yeah, absolutely. How many times have people looked to the stars and seen patterns that we've since realized were just a coincidence? But who's to say that in the setting that you're running, that these scientists or something see patterns and those patterns are real, that they were left there by an ancient alien civilization ready to come back, or were left there so that once humanity escaped to the stars, they had almost like leaving a time capsule or a backpack or something of that nature. Like, hey, we're going to leave these pyramids out here. And once humanity realizes how to get there, all of a sudden now they're invited into like maybe an intergalactic community. And that's how they were allowed. Maybe the pyramids themselves are starships, or they're just conduits for warp holes or something. Or maybe inside there's just a bunch of random trinkets, and it's up to humanity to put the pieces together to figure out what's going on. Or it could just be something as mysterious as the interiors are just filled with nothing but scientific and mathematical and computational and chemical analyses of just randomized, and by putting them together we're able to create things like artificial gravity, opening up wormholes, communicating across intergalactic space faster than light, that kind of thing. Sorry, sorry, Zev. Fighting a huge cold. Ooh, huge whole body hurts. I hate that, man. Yeah. Hey, that's another thing about mountains too, man. Don't get sick. That's a whole study unto itself, using diseases in role-playing games. But yeah, when you get sick, it just shuts down your motivation to do darn near anything. It hurts your body, hurts your brain. It hurts to want to get out of bed. It hurts to think too deeply about things. Yeah, absolutely. Vince says mountain sickness. Yeah. Oh yeah. Go back to the hypoxia again. But also with high-tech science fiction and those kind of things, of course we can play with, of course you've got your medieval creatures. I always brought up, dire goats and rust monsters and manticores and mountain yetis and trolls and things of that nature. But of course we have in science fiction, we've got a number of alien species or creatures or something. And of course they can come from as close as they could be, meaning that they could be native species or newly sentient creatures, or have lived on the planet for a long time, all the way to something that came from thousands of light years away and decided to inhabit or land upon the world. Even in the comic books, there's a character known as the Martian Manhunter, and the Martian Manhunter was a Martian that lived on Mars, and kind of the story's been of that character has been told many times, but the idea behind it was embracing like the John Carter of Mars stories, the Edgar Rice Burroughs stories of Mars having canals that were filled with water, and there are alien species that live on these planets. I believe there's a role-playing game series tabletop game known as Rocket Age, and that embraces the fact that it's like retrofuturism, where our our ancestors' view of what the future would be of people living on the other planets like Venus, like Mars, is actually true. Space 1889 also has Martians too. Yes, that's right. Space 1889. You can take yourself an old tramp freighter through space and go to Mars and fight them in your royal Victorian garb and whatnot, and everything. And there's an appeal to retrofuturism. Yes, steampunk, diesel, half steampunk, half diesel punk, in many ways, or retro future punk, I suppose you could classify it as. But there's something to be said about about pulp action where the good guys are good and the bad guys are bad, and you don't explain why you can actually stand on the deck, open deck of a sailing ship in space. You just go, yeah, we're just going to go with it and go on. Ricker says, I think I might have been one of the few people who found some enjoyment in the John Carter movie. I don't doubt it. I don't think the movie was bad. It was the marketing. It just, they didn't none of the marketing explained what the movie was about, and that's why I think Jules Verne, thank you. Yeah, that's why a lot of people were like, "There's nothing wrong with this movie. It was actually kind of cool." But calling it John Carter was like, I think every other movie that had Mars in a title failed, and they wanted to get rid of the Mars, as opposed to explaining that the movie isn't about scientific Mars. It was more action adventure, at a time before we in the tabletop community started embracing the separation of swords and sorcery and laser guns and spaceships. There was a time when the Jules Verne, Edgar Rice Burroughs, it was one and the same. It was magic and science fiction and laser guns and swords, and it was all one thing, and that kind of it embraced that idea. Vince says, Jules Verne also traveled to Mars, or am I wrong? Yeah, I believe he did. I believe he did. I think Mars. I believe he went to Venus, maybe Mercury and Saturn. I'm not sure. Yeah, Rigger says, yeah, the marketing was crap for that. That's for sure. Yeah, because when they first started talking about it, I was just like, bored. And then when I actually saw it after it came out on demand or something, I was just bored. Let me check this out. And I was actually kind of mad. Like, why didn't they tell me what this movie was about? Idiots. But that's what they are. Yeah. Dead Man the Storyteller says the story is called The Princess of Mars, where Jules Verne travels to Mars. Okay. Or is it when John Carter goes to Mars? I don't know. Not Jules Verne. You get what I'm saying. The main character goes to Mars. Vince says, I think the movie was interesting. At least they had some nice action and ideas. That is most what I am looking for nowadays. And it had, as a matter of fact, if you look up concept art for John Carter of Mars, it actually has some of the best world creating concept art that I think you could steal from. That is excellent. Especially if you want to do like a desert, barren landscape kind of idea. Princess of Mars. Vince says the moon for sure, but I think also other planets. And Ricker says that's Carter, not Verne. So John Carter went to Mars in the story, The Princess of Mars. And yes, he went to the moon and such. So even when we're like right now, we're talking about science fiction. Even in the retro future science fiction, it embraced a lot of what we today would think of as fantasy, such as the fact that the moon has an atmosphere, Mars has a breathable atmosphere. Although they did bring up the fact that John Carter from Earth on a lighter atmosphere on Mars makes him a superhuman, kind of. So that would be kind of interesting to play with for like a setting or player characters. Like, oh yeah, all you guys are just regular people on Earth, but when you go to these other places, it makes you, when you land on the moon and it's like gravity to the people who normally live there, like you're like this powerful master race person, almost like a Superman. When you go to Mars and the moon, maybe their bone structure is lighter, possibly, or something. You could make that kind of excuse. Dead Man the Storyteller says there's also a movie called Princess of Mars. it came out around the same time as John Carter. I didn't know that. Yeah, Vince says the Superman effect. Of course, the scientific explanation of Superman is that the logical reason for Superman to even exist is that his people came from a high radiation, high gravity planet, that when Superman comes here, our gravity is so light and his body is so dense that he is Superman on Earth, but to regular Kryptonians, he's normal. Now, of course, in the comic books, even if that was the case, they gloss over it. The fact that, because why wouldn't Superman be biologically shorter than the rest of us, but squatter, and wouldn't be able to fly per se, unless he had some ability to, alter like the magnetic field or something. But if you wanted to translate him as close as possible to real scientific effects, it could be the same way for human beings that go to light gravity worlds, that we can move greater mass, we can easily jump 5 times as far as the natural beings that live there, and that kind of thing. So yeah, absolutely. Zeb, you're silly. Like, huh? You had an 8 charisma on Earth, and somehow the moon rocks gave you a 16. well, maybe that huge boost is the fact that that on Earth maybe you had like low self-esteem, but once you get out there, you're just like, I am kind of cool. Yeah, maybe I'm gonna stand up a little straighter. Everyone looking around at you as you open up a stuck jar of mayonnaise. Everyone's like, wow, he used his knees. He put it between his knees and twisted it open. And you're just like, yeah, I am pretty good. Yeah. Vince said they had this in the Orville, a race that lives on a high gravity planet and are super strong everywhere else. That is very true. I love that show, The Orville. I know it rubs some people the wrong way. It's just a parody of Star Trek, which is the whole point of the show. Whatever. Anyway, I love the show, a lot of observational humor, but there was an episode where one of the main characters on the show is the smallest individual on the crew, who is the strongest member of the crew, who comes from a high gravity world in which those people value education and scholarly endeavors rather than military ones, which is it's hilarious. It was kind of funny. And of course, on their own planet, it's high gravity. To them, it's just another normal day. But for the rest of them, it's so high gravity that you can get crushed on it. And they actually play with it, make a little joke of it. And then they actually show that happening when one of them is in their gravity adjusted spacesuits to compensate for the heavy gravity. And when the power pack goes out, the captain's legs get crushed, and it's pretty nasty looking. But for television and for the Orville, that is. But yeah, there's a character who comes from a high gravity world, and they actually bring up the fact that her living for her would be a low gravity environment is dangerous, and you have to have like a medical compensation for it. So they come up with the way to solve that as well, which would be a really cool way for using a game system. Say, for example, if you want to design your own rules for different races and such, I know going to bring up Eclipse Phase again, but if you're going to have humanity spread out amongst the stars, maybe biologically we start to separate quite a bit. So you get some Lunarian babies, loony babies, that humans start living on Earth. This was brought up in the first season of The Expanse. Some people that live on the moon and other low gravity places start to grow very tall, well over 6 feet, like 7-foot people, maybe even upwards of 8 feet tall, but their bone structures are light and their heart can't handle the heavier gravity of Earth standard 1.0 G. Vince says the weird thing is that they never changed the gravity on spaceships, even though that would make a lot of things easier. You're right. That's something that's not often talked about, and we're circling back to mountains and such, especially when it comes to high gravity and low gravity and such. Yeah, Vince brings. I was about to bring that up about gravity on spaceships, like transportation on ship, training, using more space, elevators, etc. Yeah, that's something that's quite ignored. And this circles back to me being the self-appointed third pillarist, that it would behoove us not to use light gravity or zero gravity or microgravity in space. It just makes things a lot easier on a day-to-day basis. Now, long term, until we find a way to hack a system where our hearts can handle it, our bodies don't degenerate, our bone structures, and that's an accepted thing in a lot of science fiction games, where some scientists or group of people have like a calcium hack. Basically, everything you eat has some form of way to bond calcium to our bones, and daily exercise, or at least regular exercise methods, or even nanotech or electrical stimulus or genetic engineering has made our circulatory system stronger, the muscular system stronger without atrophying. Yeah, once you get past that part, we're just like, okay, well, some of us live in light gravity, some of us live in zero gravity. But to be honest with you, the mixing of the light and zero and standard gravity and heavy gravity is something that's ignored. And I think it's not just ignored in tabletop gaming, it's ignored in mass media because it's just so hard to, it's extremely difficult to portray that using our modern day filming techniques, even with as much money as pumped into movies. It's very difficult to do something that you can just hand wave away and incorporate, unless you're watching movies that specifically talk about it, like Gravity, or what's recent movies? Gravity, the Martian movie, most recent one, Mark Watney, Escaping Mars, Mission to Mars, whatever. Anyway, Interstellar, the movies like that, like unless they're specifically based around that, you can get an excellent series like The Expanse that uses zero gravity and light gravity, but it's very difficult to do it. And it's definitely a session zero thing. Like, hey, in this game, we're going to play in this science fiction setting. We're going to have various levels of gravity. Are you down for manipulating the rules with that and embracing those rules? And if the PCs are like, your player character's like, yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. It makes sense. Then I say, go for it. Yeah. Rickard says, our main control, we got some heavy cargo coming in. Can you turn down the gravity in unit 3A? I don't know why communication systems always have to have static. It's almost like I'm being idiotic, but it's like, why in the future would we go backwards when it comes to like static on radios or dirt and grime in space and stuff like that? Like, why wouldn't we just not have that any longer? But I think it's hilarious because it's a trope, right? Like me doing that is a trope in science fiction. Vince says there are tons of problems astronauts have. Their sight also gets worse in the first few days. They can't taste. I wonder how humans adjusted for microgravity would look. I'm not exactly sure. Is it just called The Martian? The movie, is it just called The Martian? Vince says, because cliches, that's why. Yeah, because cliches. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's some things, believe you me, because this is going to be a subject for next week, that some things that don't make sense actually make sense because of the cliches. Like next week, we're going to talk about the weather and the idea that when people are sad, it always rains. And if it's in a dark noir place, the sun never shines and it always rains. But when someone uncovers a clue, it's always sunny and shiny outside. That kind of thing. Yeah, two star-crossed lovers meeting across the field. It's always bright and sunny. It's never downpouring. And that's just the thing. Deadman says Eclipse Phase has the Verger biomorph and the quartz synthmorph. Both are calibrated for higher gravity. I'm familiar with the quartz morph, not familiar with the Verger biomorph. But what Deadman's talking about is in the science fiction game Eclipse Phase. Of course, people have cortical stacks. I'm sure you're familiar with cortical stacks. And to go to the high gravity worlds, you, instead of just trying to adjust your, maybe your normal, I want to say normal, there's no normal in eclipse phase, your biologically human body, and then put your cortical stack, download your brain into a body that can handle the high gravity. And so going to these horrifically hostile worlds, instead of taking all the time and energy it would take to try to protect your human body, you just get into a morph that can survive in that place. Just like there are mechanical there are mechanical morphs, synth morphs, basically mechanical morphs that can exist on the surface of Venus, which is kind of weird. But yeah, there are plenty of those. And what a great way to play with that in the eclipse phase. I love that. I love that idea. Zev says the same reason we still have phones in sci-fi media, despite we are stepping closer and closer away from phones in our time. You need to be able to understand. Yeah, that's very true. I mean, even today, I've seen television shows with characters still using flip phones, and you kind of scratch your head. You know, it's a trope. It's a thing that it's very difficult to do storytelling with smartphones and some other of these other things. And so until we got to the point where you see television shows now where a person is on their smartphone and you actually see on the screen the what they're typing in and sending, even when it comes to like, I hate you, I don't want to speak to you again, and then you see them delete those words and go, have a great day, I love you. You know, until writers were able to incorporate that, the use of a smartphone was just not going to be embraced. And so that's why those things become cliches, because it's just shorthand for, yeah, I'm trying to write this thing and I really don't want to deal with the ramifications of the reality of it. So just go along with us and assume that this particular thing doesn't exist in the future. You know what I mean? Vince, oh man, sorry, dude. Yeah, sorry, you got to go. Vince says, where Matt Damon is stranded on Mars. Yeah, it's called The Martian. Okay, it's just called The Martian. I was mixing it up with like Mission to Mars, and I think there's one called Aliens of Mars or something. Zev says the same reason we still have. Yeah, you need to be able to understand things. Yeah. Okay, so circling back, so we've gotten into our light gravity and our zero gravity places. We go into these different planetary systems. We're making our way, to land on a planet, maybe the highest peak of an asteroid or a small moon, or even Mars itself. Maybe that's the most logical place to land. Although honestly, that isn't. You're so silly, Rickard. But I know in our modern day, we wouldn't land a probe on Olympus Mons. We'd land it on a big open field as flat as possible, and then maybe make a trek to some height like that. But maybe after 5 or 20 or, 200 missions, maybe it's possible to land on that kind of location, or maybe it's militarily important to do so, to land on those places. And also with terraforming, at some point, if you want to terraform a planet, you're going to have to incorporate far more than just algae and microorganisms. You're going to have to put some plants out there and then start incorporating some live animals. So it's possible that humanity may biologically create things like bees and ants and worms, and then go up even higher than that, birds and maybe some other predatory animals to eat those other creatures and such. And that could get out of hand. And that in itself, your earthly mountain goat may look a whole lot different climbing up, a 5-mile mountain like Olympus Mons, right? And those things, we don't know how much larger they would be, if they would even look like goats, and if there are maybe some of these biological creatures that humanity created gets out of hand. We always love to mess with things and have science go out of hand. That's a trope as well. So the idea of humans making a Jurassic Park and a Jurassic World, who's to say that they don't do the same thing on other planets? And that in itself may be a setting a setting conceit that humanity has spread amongst the stars, and oh, by the way, we made a bunch of mistakes and we're dealing with it right now. Ricker says terraforming shield needs to be placed at a high point to increase its distance. That's right. Okay, who wants Ewok? I hope you meant that as who wants Ewok, as in barbecuing them. But yes, you're absolutely right. A terraforming shield, maybe something needs to be placed at a high altitude. It could be oxygen, nitrogen generators that are spewing material into the air so that it starts to terraform the planet, and that's where the conversion of the thin atmosphere of Mars is being converted into oxygens and nitrogens and other things that we can breathe. Maybe it could be something far more high tech, like an energy type of shield, or if I'm not mistaken, I don't believe Mars has a magnetosphere, so there's no using a compass on Mars, so it's possible these highest peaks might be triangulatory locations for like GPS and such, basically giant antennae, giant signals that people use to navigate their way around. And if something goes wrong, it might be difficult to triangulate your position when the machines go down. And of course, you might be using satellites as well. I don't know. There could be a huge mission project to hollow out a mountain like Olympus Mons, and it's one big giant arcology, like cyberpunk arcology. Even with light gravity, there's like hallways and huge communities and corporations and what do we call it? Dark alleys and subterranean havens for black market and criminality down in and around this mountain, where the entire mountain itself, Olympus, is the future's new cyberpunk world, where everything is underneath like a giant dome or something, and everyone lives in and amongst the mountain's been bored out by robots and such over time, that the rich have migrated to the top and the poor live down at the bottom. That's possible as well. Ricker says it even just thinking like a force shield that creates a shield against space radiation, okay, as well as making the area around it able to hold an atmosphere. It's possible too. As a matter of fact, the idea of using a force field or doming over a crater or a volcano, even one that's long since been dormant, is possible. I believe Mars does not have is not actively geologically, like there's no sliding tectonic plates or anything. So capping, using a force field generation or solid shield over the top of the peak of Olympus Mons would probably make a lot of sense. Even you could have technology that weaves together some kind of very high tensile strength cap over the top of it, or I believe, I can't describe the technology, but Isaac Arthur does a lot about active support energies, where instead of building a foundation that holds up a huge building, you're actually using particles that are blasted upwards to keep an object from falling down. So a force field generator may not be what we think of as like science fiction, where it's hard and you just knock on it, but it could just be the blasting up of high intensity particles to keep the radiation from landing on the people below you. I'm not describing it well. Isaac Arthur does a better job at doing that. But yeah. Also going up and down a gravity well, I brought up the idea of a space elevator, but maybe there are even sleds to launch heavy massed objects up off of Mars surface, and maybe there are like rail systems to launch things from the base all the way up the mountainside and then launch them directly out into space for other spacecraft to capture them, or for them to fly through space to orbit other locations. That's a possibility as well, especially if people come across like, Volkswagen-sized diamonds and platinum deposits on Mars that might be completely useless on Mars, but might be extremely valuable somewhere else. That might be a point of contention to mining operations on Mars, launching raw materials off of Mars surface. And, there could be vying corporations, there could be terrorism activities, there could be business for sabotage, there could be factions that want to control the commerce and whatnot. So yeah, Rickard says, sorry. Ooh, it looked like it moved on me, but it did not. What else is there? There's also the idea of when using science fiction mountains. We talked about different cultures and traveling amongst them. Being on a mountainside does not mean that it's just you and rock. Of course, we have ourselves the fact that it is in the upper atmosphere. What's happening in the upper atmosphere? So on Mars, you're definitely going to come across heavy radiation. So if you have radiation or you want to include heavy radiation in your science fiction game, maybe at the lower levels, maybe maybe Mars is partially terraformed. So PCs walking around on the surface, all they need are like breathing masks, maybe a thermal suit. But if you get to the higher elevations, you have extreme cold, i.e. cold that is nearly the vacuum of space, if not simply just a super thin atmosphere. You're going to have the threat of radiation. It's possible even being hit by micrometeors. Mars doesn't have a very heavy atmosphere to break up micrometeors that impact its surface. Earth has an atmosphere. We're impacted by micrometeors and particulates and even trash and debris that falls from space, and it burns up long before it gets here, so we don't see it. But on an airless moon, on an asteroid, these places without an atmosphere or a very thin atmosphere, there's the possibility of getting pinged in the head at something going 18,000 miles an hour. Now, mind you, is that save or die territory? Sure, but you could ramp up the tension by having technology that predicts those things coming into the atmosphere and landing in certain areas. And so the danger might be, hey, we've got to scale this mountain to get to shelter, and we only have a limited amount of time because someone has predicted a solar flare or some kind of radiation burst or high winds or any number of things, gravity fluctuations, anything you want to include in your own gaming system. It even could be, you could be on a moon or an asteroid in an asteroid field, like something way out of our own galactic core, even although you could be in the rings of Saturn or something, and the PCs are climbing up this huge mountainside, but they have to worry about these other asteroids impacting the asteroid they're on and all that kind of stuff. So I think you could have a little bit of fun with that. Rickard says, goes on to say, so speaking of arcologies, wouldn't that be a futuristic mountain? So we don't just talk normal mountains on other planets? Yeah. Something that is again, this is a trope, although it's not a bad one, or cliche, I suppose, is the idea of an arcology. If you, as a person who used to love playing Cyberpunk, the old Cyberpunk 2017 and 2020, and still loves the 2077 style of Cyberpunk, the idea is of an arcology, a city that is the size of a mountain, that's all incorporated, that is both wide and tall and completely enclosed, or at least the idea is that the city is enclosed inside of some kind of geodesic or dome, and the city itself is its own environment, that the people don't need to leave it to go about their daily lives for their education. They spend their entire lives in this mega city that rises, hundreds of stories or more, maybe even miles into the sky, and that it is completely enclosed. Now, of course, on Earth, you don't necessarily need to have a dome over top of it, although that seems to be not necessarily a dome, but it seems to be that some of these arcologies are basically one big giant building seen from the outside. But if you're on an alien atmosphere, you probably have it domed or protected against everything from radiation to impacts from meteors and such. Oh, and then of course it's the idea of the people living in the arcology are protected from threats from the outside, whether it's militarily speaking or acid rains or things like that. But adventuring in an arcology itself, much like the movie Dread, where it's one big apartment complex and everyone's on the inside, and they actually can protect themselves from the fallout and radiation from outside, or maybe even dust storms or something. You can have a lot of fun with that, especially if you have, say, like these elevators, and I use elevators loosely, that they might not just go up and down, but they may go laterally, and they might even go through like a tubing system, or they may go around, spiral around an arcology, and you could have a lot of fun with, I don't know, there's a bomb on one and the PCs are chasing after it, or there are mercenaries holding people hostage and the PCs, have to find one of hundreds of these programmable metro units that flow around this tube systems, or maybe the PCs are having a race and riding on the outside of these maglev vacuum tube things that move in and around the city, as well as the fact that you have to have your rich people, and again, here's another trope: the rich people live above, the poor people live down below. So you could have it outwardly, the weather's fine. Inside, maybe there's kind of like a brown down effect where moisture and condensation drips so much that all the waste and problems drip down to the bottom levels of the arcology. So maybe like the bottom 10 levels are where the seediest people live and the poorest people live. And, there's like, I don't know, acidic sludge, and it's always raining, and it's dark because sunlight never gets down there, and there's people that live, I mean, they're just criminals, and the only thing keeping everyone from not either abandoning the place or rioting and going above is because they keep the arcology going. They scrub the air filters, and they keep the fusion generators going, or whatever, the reactors going that keep the place powered all the time. And if it wasn't for them, the people from above that want law and order would just send down troops and like blast everybody and arrest everyone. But it's the blow off valve, the red light district that allows the rich people to get what they want, but still go back to their normal homes and their normal lives in society or something. And then of course, when you go in the higher areas, maybe they have huge balconies and are able to live and breathe in this area that's above the cities, where they use, vertical takeoff and landing vehicles, or even glider capes, or anti-gravity platforms to go from spire to spire, and they live in these glitzy, high glitz, high glam areas. And of course you have to have yourself balconies, walkways, catwalks, bridges, most of them without handrails, because it's space, handrails disappear. Something that our ancient man, our dwarven ancestors refused to use, and in the future, by God, we're not afraid of walking across platforms without handrails. I'm being stupid, but you get the point, right? And arcology is an environment in and of itself, and having a running gun battle on the outer skin of an arcology, or dangling from the struts that hold an arcology up, maybe as proof against acid rain or high winds or electrical storms, or radiation or solar flares or something, I think behooves us not to do that. You got to have that. You got to have the people, the PCs up in the framework and structure of the thing that protects the entire arcology. People dangling off with cables, or vertical takeoff and landing vehicles flying around, and the PCs doing the splayed arms and legs, jumping off for jumping off of a building and landing onto a vehicle as one of the PCs who's got the piloting skill just snatches them up in enough time and flies away or something. You got to do that. You got to let them do that. If they don't do it, let your NPC start to do something like that, and maybe your players will catch on like, oh, whoa, we can do some stunt work stuff. Now, mind you, session 0, right? How cinematic are you going to get with that, and how realistic? Because someone jumping off of a 1.5-mile building hoping to land onto a very small speck of a flying vehicle is probably not too smart. But sure, if you have bird suits and jetpacks and stuff, I think we can embrace a little cinema, a little cinematic action in our environment. I think also, when not just with arcologies as artificial structures in mountains and natural structures, but we have to go with our biological mountains too. Being, the space whale of space, you gotta have yourself a giant mountain that's basically one big living creature, a la the Star Wars and the Millennium Falcon inside of the mouth of a big giant worm-like creature. There might be a giant mountain that's a biological mass, and we really don't know how big it is, how dormant this creature, how long this creature's been dormant on this asteroid or small moon or even on the surface of Mars, and adventuring inside of its bloodstream and bone structure and brains and lungs and stuff. You can have a lot of fun with that as well. Maybe the creature's dead, the creature's alive but dormant, the creature is asleep and you don't want to wake it up. It could be an alien, an omen or a myth or a foretelling of an alien race, that something must be done to keep this creature dormant before it awakens, much like the kaiju, the king of monsters, of Godzilla type creatures exist in the world. And maybe we might flow into giant robot territory with this, where these creatures are dormant and asleep on any number of planetary surfaces, and you have to go into its brain, or I don't know, play a song in its ear or some other kind of crap, right? And putting probes into various parts of its body, its nervous system, which to us might be like getting struck with bolts of lightning or something, but maybe putting probes to keep this thing asleep and being attacked by what it would be considered white blood cells, getting carried in its bloodstream, being forced into its lungs and trying to escape the harsh, vacuum effect of the lungs breathing in and out, possibly being crushed in the opening and closing of the valves of the heart. What are some other dangers? Being whisked and washed away in the bladder, being destroyed by acids in the spleen, being captured in a waste byproduct of the appendix, maybe being squeezed to death by the sphincter. Oh wow! Being crushed under the movement of the muscle tendons and fibers. There's got to be some other thing. Come on, guys, you got to help me out with this. Anyway, so again, just off the top of the head, there you got biological mountains, physical, actual mountains like on Olympus, Mons, completely artificial mountains like arcologies, and that kind of thing. So next week we're going to talk about the weather. Actually, I named it Maelstrom because we're going to talk about all kinds of weather, including even nice little bits of weather. We're going to bring up the idea like what Scott Poe talks about with like very, very slick stones. Joseph Keenan, I kind of gathered a bunch of his comments because he's always brilliant. So we're going to start off Monday morning with a laundry list of things that he came up with when it comes to everything from, well, you'll see. I don't want to give too much away. And just as a comment, someone's like, oh no, DBJ selling out. I wouldn't call it selling out. Maybe pimping myself would be it. I think that's more appropriate. I am becoming maybe the streetwalker of the tabletop RPG community. I'm not sure if there's a certain type of dress for it. I don't think I'd look good in a mini skirt, but whatever have you. Anyway, guys, you have a great one. Have a great weekend. See ya.